Very good. The event is being recorded. I'd like to welcome you. Good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar, Leveraging Federal Funding for a Digital Ready Workforce. I'm Krista Vinson with Rural LISC, and we're so pleased that all of you could join us today. As you know, the COVID-19 pandemic has put a spotlight on the need for broader access to technology and digital skills. This is an issue that LISC has become very interested in, and we organized today's webinar to share information with experts in the field. Policies at the federal and state level to date have not adequately funded or been structured to respond at scale. And so today's conversation is really an investigation of where we've been and where we're going. Because things are starting to change as recovery aid begins flowing through a range of agencies and programs. Our expert panel today will answer many key questions that I know folks are asking right now. They'll discuss current policies, needed reforms, and new funding available to enhance digital inclusion, technology participation, and upskilling for underserved communities. So we'll hear from the panel for about 50 minutes and leave 10 minutes at the end for questions. Please use the chat feature, which is the speech balloon on your control panel. We'll monitor it throughout, and we'll get to as many questions as we can at the end. Please mute if you're not speaking. And now I'd like to introduce our panel. Tom Citron-Hytham is manager of North Star, a program of Literacy Minnesota. Tom has worked in the adult education field since the 1990s, and in addition to his role in founding North Star at Literacy Minnesota, Tom has been deeply involved in a range of statewide efforts at the intersection of digital literacy and equity. Sean Davis is research and policy manager at NDIA, the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. Sean is an attorney with expertise in tech policy and prior experience at the Wikimedia Foundation and the National Consumer League. Michelle Harati is policy officer at LISC, where she advocates for federal policies to broaden pathways to opportunity and supports multiple LISC programs, including economic development, workforce development, and small business development. And last but not least, Judy Mortrude is Senior Technical Advisor at World Education. She has more than 30 years experience developing, delivering, and evaluating workforce education, particularly with low literacy and high barrier populations. Judy's been a classroom teacher, a school administrator, and a state agency staffer. So pleased that this panel could join us, as well as all of our attendees. And we only have an hour, so I'll get right into it with a first set of questions for Tom. First, Tom, if you could offer us a level-setting definition of digital literacy and this emerging concept of the digital navigator. And please also talk about some of the models, including your journey with North Star. If you would, please.
Sure, Krista, I'd be happy to do that. I want to advance to the next slide. This is not necessarily a definitive definition, but I was working with our staff to try to come up with a working definition of digital literacy, since it's a term that we hear very, very frequently. So what we came up with is what you see before us, the ability and knowledge needed to access and operate internet-connected devices, to successfully use commonly available software, and to navigate and utilize online resources in order to effectively communicate and complete social and work-related tasks in a virtual space. And I think we all are very, very aware of how extremely crucial this has become over the last 14 months, 15 months at the time of the pandemic, that if you are not digitally literate, if you aren't well connected, it's very, very difficult to function effectively in your daily lives. And we've seen that in so many of the people we've worked with, and maybe sometimes ourselves. We go on to the next slide. So there's a huge need for training and navigation for people to be able to be digitally literate. And the training and the skill building are really a crucial component that sometimes gets a little bit overlooked, I think. We're very, very aware of the need for access. We're very aware of the need for devices. I think sometimes there's an assumption that people will just pick up the skills, and some people can do that, but many people really need some help. And one way to do that is through the use of digital navigation. And that's a concept that's become increasingly popular over the last couple of years. And it's can be provided in a number of different ways. But basically, it's somebody who can help people who are working to become digitally literate master the skills and the information that they need in order to achieve their own goals. And there's lots of different ways and models in which digital navigation can be provided. A couple of examples. Literacy Minnesota last year used some CARES money to do a tech pack project where computers were provided to low-income people, and then Literacy Minnesota provided the digital navigators who contacted the recipients via phone, helped them set up their devices, and then help them complete the first several assessments and training portions of the North Star project, so they had some basic skills to begin with. Both National Digital Inclusion Alliance and World Ed have developed models for digital navigation. Sometimes those models include almost what I would consider a social work component, where they're actively responding to other needs beyond just the digital literacy needs of individuals. Sometimes it's more of a referral model where when people have other issues around housing, health, whatever, they refer them to other resources and don't try to meet those needs themselves. But basically, there's a group called the Open Door Collective, which is some of you may be members of or may be aware of, which is working to lift people out of poverty through skill development in a number of areas. And one of the subgroups there has been working on the whole idea of digital navigation in a health context. And after many meetings, we came to the conclusion that there's certainly not any one right model, but basically digital navigation is a set of skills that can be used in many contexts. It can be used in a general population. It could be used for people who are trying to master specific skills for employment, or for people who need to access healthcare in a number of different areas. But it's a way of meeting those needs where people are and as they express their own needs. If we go on to the next slide. So I asked to speak just a little bit about North Star, which some of you may be familiar with. And this was developed about 10 years ago now, the first iteration, in response to the need for basic assessment and certification. And before we created North Star, we did an environmental scan, and what we found was that there were a fair amount of assessment and curricular resources that are much higher level, but there really was nothing that was designed specifically for people who didn't have a lot of experience online and really needed some help in developing those basic skills. So we now have a three-part model. We have assessments that assess people's basic skills and identify the skills they've mastered and the things they still need to work on. We have certificates and electronic badges that people can receive when they pass individual assessments at a certain level. And then we have curriculum, both classroom curriculum that can be used either in a classroom or online at a distance, and also something we call North Star Online Learning, which is all original content that individuals can use on their own to master the skills in specific areas. We now have actually since I wrote this the other day, we have almost 1,370 sites now in 7 countries and 14 assessments that cover 3 main areas: essential computer skills, essential software skills, and technology in daily life. We have just under 5 million assessments that have now been given. And I think that the growth of North Star really illustrates some needs that are unmet, that we're all collectively in different ways trying to meet together. When we first invented North Star, we thought we were just developing something for local use because our local library needed some help in assessing people's skills when they were coming in looking for jobs, and they needed to know how to determine whether someone just needed to be put down in front of a computer and they knew exactly what to do versus people who didn't have those skills and really needed some instruction and hands-on assistance. So we developed this for local use in Minnesota, and it very quickly caught on, and we've had over 50% growth now since the pandemic started in terms of sites and so on. And to me, that illustrates largely that there is such a huge need for basic skill in net before. I think it also kind of reflects a certain I don't know what you might call it, class privilege or something, that many people, many of us who are work in this area are fairly well educated, and really need to constantly remind ourselves that many people in marginalized populations have had very few opportunities and really need access to resources that might not be readily apparent to us initially. So I think in lots of areas, it's really important to think about and talk with the people you're trying to serve and figure out really what they need and how can those needs be met in an effective way. On to the next slide. I'm going to talk just for a second. Judy may talk more about this, but talking about digital literacy and specifically North Star as a skill gain under WIOA, which Judy will describe in a minute. But digital literacy, when they wrote WIOA a number of years ago, the Workforce Investment and Opportunity Act, they included digital literacy as an important skill area. But there was no way to, under the National Reporting System, which is how adult basic ed and workforce and so on is monitored and so on, there was no way to assess people's digital literacy skills or provide credit to programs that were helping people include those skills. But there's been some recent guidance that just came out regarding how digital literacy can be reported in IET, integrated education and training courses, and workforce programs. And what this could mean for programs around the country, if you are funded through WIOA, either as a workforce or as an adult education program, is that there's now an opportunity to record and receive credit at the federal level for interim gains. And those could be digital literacy. There's a number of other things. So the NRS system has always focused on the ultimate outcomes for people. The interim gains are steps that people are taking towards those ultimate gains. So for instance, an example we might use, if somebody has a CNA training program and it's been determined by the employer partner that digital literacy skills are a needed set of skills that they're going to need in their daily jobs to do online patient charting, then mastering those skills, those basic digital literacy skills, could count as an interim gain. And that's where North Star could come in, or other programs that you might identify. If it has an assessment at a certain level, that can be reported as a gain to the feds. And that's something that needs to be worked out at the state level with your adult ed state director. But I'm really hopeful that in the next period of time, we'll really be seeing the ability for programs to gain credit for helping people in some really basic and important ways that have never really counted on the federal scorecard, so to speak, in the past. I think that's my last slide right now, so I'll turn it back over to Krista.
Thank you, Tom. That's such good information. And Judy, building off of what Tom said, one of the key insights we'd like the audience to go home with today is where public funding to support digital upskilling currently comes from. So if you could unpack the WIOA Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act a bit more.
Sure. Sure. Thank you. Starting with a little bit of a background report, I'm going to put this link in the chat. As Tom said, the COVID-19 pandemic has made it really abundantly clear that digital skills are critical to navigating life in the United States. You know, as a family member supporting a child's remote learning, which I know North Star now has an assessment for. As a community member trying to schedule a COVID-19 vaccination or hold a telemedicine visit, you know, as a worker, from frontline workers picking groceries off the shelf for delivery to ever more accelerating automation on production floors, making that human-machine interaction, you know, even more prevalent in the workplace. And certainly as an adult educator, there has been lots of research on what happened when we pivoted to emergency remote teaching and learning over the last year and a half, and the impacts that it's had on the adult education field. You can find this analysis where we brought together a technical working group of some of the early researchers. And I know there's another research project that I believe ODC is launching, which will give us even more insight into how our public systems, our adult education system, our workforce development system has responded in this time of much more remote service and the need for digital skills. The next slide. One of the things that really gave me great great heart was this quote from a currently open solicitation from the U.S. Department of Education. The U.S. Department of Education, I think yesterday, just dropped 2 solicitations for technical assistance. One is specifically on digital literacy for our field, so that's exciting. This quote actually comes from a solicitation called Building English Language Skills, Building English Language Acquisition in Integrated Education and Training, as Tom said, IET. So great to see, right, that the federal agencies are recognizing that literacy, numeracy, digital literacy, English proficiency, these are all fundamental skills for workplace success, for personal and social well-being. And that's a great nod to what can happen under WIOA, as Tom started to tell you. So the next slide, a little bit of background here. So WIOA passed in 2014. It did indeed give a nod to digital literacy, has a definition of digital literacy, which mirrors and actually references the museum and library science definition. But the digital literacy component for service providers, for us in adult education and our workforce counterparts, is inside something called the workforce preparation definition. Workforce preparation is defined in WIOA as activities. Workforce preparation activities include activities, programs, and services designed to help an individual acquire a combination of academic skills, critical thinking skills, digital literacy skills, self-management skills, and then it goes on into a list. So that's where we see digital literacy flagged inside the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, is inside this definition of workforce preparation, which is new to the law when it changed, but it's not new to the field, right? We've always had this comprehensive set of sort of success skills that we embed in our programs. So because it's included in the definition of adult education and literacy, it is an allowable activity with regular adult education funds, digital literacy, as it's defined in workforce preparation. And workforce preparation is also a component of this integrated education and training strategy, this 3-part strategy where there is a lot of emphasis. In fact, that quote on the previous slide came from, right, a technical assistance project to help the field do more integrated education and training. And so IET requires adult education, it requires workforce training, it requires workforce prep. And again, that's where digital literacy lives. So in the next slide, as Tom said, what we measure is what we do, and WIOA did bring us shared accountability, sort of. In the adult education world, we're working our way there with this recent new guidance. But just sharing on this slide, these are the WIOA performance accountability metrics that are more or less shared across the core WIOA programs. Employment, right there on the left. One thing I would point out, if you are in conversation with local workforce boards who tend to still be stuck in talking about placement and retention, those are not the way employment is measured in WIOA exactly. Employment is measured in WIOA by 6 months after Judy left my program, does she have a job? 1 year after Judy left my program, does she have a job? Doesn't need to be the same job. I don't need to exit Judy in order to take that gain. Earnings, obviously, median earnings, credential attainment, as Tom said, that recognized post-secondary credential. Then there's those measurable skill gains, as Tom said, the interim progress measures, 5 types of gains that you can take while somebody is in your program. And then there's this 6th sort of elusive measure called effectiveness in serving employers that states are currently experimenting and piloting different ways of meeting that measure or documenting that performance measure. The next slide. So here's measurable skill gain as we think about it and as we thought about it within the adult ed world. Those are the 5 types. What you see in green was really what was open to us in adult education until 2 months ago when we expanded into the full complement. So actually, this is one of the reasons that I think when North Star started, quickly there were quite a few local workforce boards that became proctoring sites, immediately signed up for it, because in our Title I partners, our adult, youth, dislocated worker, WIO partners, our Title IV partners, vocational rehabilitation service partners, all could use all 5 of these measurable skill gains right away. It was only the adult education system that was limiting us to number 1 and number 3. Now we have 2, 4, and 5, and number 4 is really where we're thinking about digital literacy in progress toward milestones. Again, in this window that's been open for us in adult education is limited to 2 kinds of program models: integrated education and training, and workplace adult education and literacy. So it seems like a minor change, but as Tom said, it really does have this opportunity if states start to issue some guidance and our data systems start recognizing how to help us take credit for it, to help our system really start documenting what we're doing to support the digital skill building of the people in our programs, because we know there's been tremendous amount of energy and resources and efforts, and we know that we can use our funds for this work. And finally, we're now going to be able to, at least in some instances, be able to document the skills that our participants are gaining and use that to count in our performance measurement system. And I think that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Judy. Great overview. And I wonder, Michelle, if you can talk about how to open that window wider at the local level and what local administrators might think about as they seek to advance a broader reach for digital literacy upskilling with their clients and communities.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Krista. I think Judy laid a lot of the groundwork here, and Tom as well, in terms of the opportunity that we see with the recent changes and the prioritization and uplifting of digital literacy and those skill gains as being something we can actually measure and report on. We recognize, though, particularly at the local level, that even though these changes are made at the federal level, it can take some time and usually a lot of energy and education efforts from local community-based partners who are doing workforce development programs and seeking to integrate digital literacy to make sure that their local workforce boards are A, aware of these changes, B, are educated on why it makes sense to adopt these changes and why it is really fundamental for the 21st century workforce to be thinking about how digital literacy interplays with our workforce development programs. And so at LISC, within our network of financial opportunity centers, Rural Works, and then the Digital Navigator programs, it's something we've been increasingly paying attention to and trying to make sure, as part of this webinar as well, that our partners know that this is a resource for federal funding and that there's active steps that we can be taking really to do the education and the uplifting so that when workforce boards are making their funding decisions, this is something that's on their radar and that they know there's partners that are in the area that are willing to take on and do this work.
Judy, I wonder if you'd both elaborate on that as well as lift up the possibility of providing these types of supports through TANF and SNAP-E&T.
Sure. I mean, again, the federal, the federal investments, it doesn't feel like it sometimes, but the federal investments are really about driving equity and making sure there is service at some level across the country. Then there's so much power in the state, right? In the state deciding, the states can't become less restrictive, but they can become more restrictive. And the state, make WIOA plans, they make TANF plans, they make SNAP-E&T plans. And so having the conversations with the local providers is great, but also figuring out where that state decision making is happening, because federally, there's recently been a question asked of the TANF system. Can TANF funds help people, the needy families, overcome that digital divide, right, by giving access to computers and the internet? And the answer from the federal government is states have a lot of flexibility under TANF. They can fund innovative strategies as long as it meets one of the program purposes, and certainly they pointed to, one of the program purposes of TANF is to end dependence of needy parents on government benefits by promoting job preparation, work, and marriage. And so as long as the state can draw a line to that purpose in the federal law, there's great flexibility, and they certainly said, yes, the state can use the federal funds. They can use their state maintenance of effort expenditure funds to purchase computers, to provide training, cover the cost of internet access for eligible needy families. And then SNAP ENT funds, the employment and training funds, we've seen so much emphasis in the last few years of creating what are called like third-party providers of ENT and turning on the 50-50 reimbursement funds for every dollar that of non-federal funds spent supporting SNAP ENT participants. You can get 50 cents reimbursed from a federal pot, unlimited federal pot. So there's been just a great amount of energy turning on that funding stream, which again offers great flexibility as long as it's tied to the purposes of the law.
Tom and Sean, anything to add before we switch gears to the new funding environment?
Not that I can say. No, I think everything was really wrapped up well, and I don't, want to beat a dead horse. So, definitely able to move on.
The only thing I'd add is something I'm just starting to think more about, which I'm hopefully presenting sometime in the future. But in this whole area of education, workforce centers, and so on, it's very much geared overall towards employment and preparing people for employment. One of the things we certainly have discovered when we work like in the Tech Pack program is the people who receive computers and training and internet access have their own reasons for doing that. And those reasons don't always necessarily include employment, at least as a top level kind of thing. And there's so much emphasis now, rightfully so, on equity and on responding to people's needs as they perceive them and as they express them. And I'm starting to think a lot more about how do we meet people's digital literacy needs in ways that reflect their preferences, their needs, their culture, et cetera. I don't have any great answers yet, but I'm thinking about that, hoping to do some writing about it. But then the challenge, I think, is going to be, one of the challenges is going to be, even if one is able to define that, how do you marry that with this emphasis on employment and preparation for employment that goes throughout the other system? And I don't have the answer to that, but I think it's really something to be aware of. And that while we may have great programs that we think are going to be wonderful to help people get ready to further their education and become employed, that may not be the primary need that that person is perceiving that they have in terms of becoming digitally literate. And so I think it's just something to be aware of.
And perhaps the new funding environment gives us an environment to be asking these critical questions. And so I'll turn it back to you, Michelle. Given the unprecedented level of recovery aid now flowing, what should the local workforce development delivery system start doing now locally to take advantage of this moment and perhaps start to pose as a local community of practice these questions about how to resource digital skilling?
Thanks, Krista. Do we have the slides on the CRF that I could reference? Great. So just for a little bit of context setting in terms of the Coronavirus Relief Fund, as you may be aware, this is the record-breaking amount of federal assistance that's been dedicated for states and localities to really respond to the economic impacts of COVID and help promote an equitable recovery. And so we see this flexible funding as really a tremendous opportunity to expand and uplift the work of digital literacy programs broadly, but then also looking at it from an upskilling and workforce development. How can we make sure that people who may have suffered economic impacts by losing their job, or maybe their job's not going to be coming back in the post-pandemic recovery, how do we make sure that they have the skills to be able to take advantage of new opportunities? So really broadly setting the stage for this, You can use these dollars to respond to COVID and address the economic effects. It can be used by governments to address any revenue reductions that they've had from a loss of revenue from the pandemic. It can be used for water, broadband, and sewer infrastructure, and it can also be used to provide some premium pay for workers. And the deadline on this is pretty flexible. So we've got until the end of 2024. And so we see this as an opportunity for a lot of our community-based organizations and local LISC offices to really start to think about how do we present this to states and localities who are making these decisions about how they're going to be spending the tremendous amount of aid that they're receiving to make sure that our needs and the priorities of the communities that we served are being met. And if we can go to the next slide. So just wanted to break it down a little bit so people have an idea. And so the first allocations are coming now of where the money is going of that $350 billion. So for the states and the District of Columbia, there's about $195 billion, which is going to be going to the states. Of that, 25.5 billion is going to be divided equally. And then the other 169 billion is going to be based on the decline of unemployed workers. So the various states will be getting different amounts. And then there's also going to be 65.1 billion going to counties. And that's going to be based on either their county share of the US population or a modified CDBG formula. And then there's also going to be money going straight to municipalities, so the cities themselves. And so for populations with at least 50,000, it's about just over 45 billion. And then those with less than 50,000, just under 20 billion. And so we think when we're thinking through the advocacy and how do we make sure that you're taking advantage of these opportunities, realizing that it's at multiple levels of the government, whether that's at the state, county, or local level, and seeing where the funding is flowing so that even before they're developing the NOFOs, that they're aware that this is an outstanding need that needs to be addressed. And also just for everyone's context, and I can pop it into the chat, Treasury also just released updated guidance and FAQs on this funding. And within that, they directly address that using this funding for digital literacy and broadband infrastructure, they're eligible expenses. So we just want to make sure that that's on everyone's radar and that as the conversations are being had, that you're at the table really presenting this as an outstanding need.
Michelle, I just wanted to add that, just kind of emphasize that things are moving very quickly. And I think it's really important to move for us collectively who want to be involved in this and making sure these needs be met. A number of states are doing comprehensive digital literacy statewide projects. A lot of that seems to be being, in my experience, spearheaded through library systems. But counties and cities have a lot of revenue and can use someone for digital literacy, but as I said, things are moving quickly, people are making decisions quickly, so it's not something we can sort of afford to sit back and wait to have happen and hope that maybe some crumbs come our way. I think we really need to proactively and assertively present the needs of the people we work with that we know are often low income, often marginalized in various other ways, and really need these services. And my fear is if we don't make that clear, that they'll be overlooked.
Tom, thank you so much. And I think if we advance the slides one more, you have a couple of creative local examples and some states that have taken some leadership already in this area. If you could expand on that.
Sure. A number of states are doing, as I mentioned, very comprehensive efforts to try to become more digitally literate overall. Some of that was beginning to be in place even before the relief funds, but the release of those funds is really escalating it quickly. I've spent most of this week talking to states who are calling, who are saying we need to do something about digital literacy. We want to work with you. How can we do that? One of a couple of examples. Hawaii is really interesting. They have a very motivated state librarian and one other person in their workforce system who want Hawaii to become a very digitally literate state. That's their entire goal. And they're working with workforce, and they're working actively with employers. And they're just in the process of implementing North Star statewide as a tool. Also, their junior colleges are going to be involved. And their idea is to set up almost a competition between employers to see who can have the most digitally literate workforce. And they've got some really interesting strategies that they're thinking about. And it's going to be very, very interesting to see how that plays out. Washington State already has begun, even prior to this, to developing a whole statewide emphasis on digital literacy. Their library system is spearheaded the whole piece having to do with North Star. They also have they have funds for digital navigation. They have a number of different things that they're trying. And what I find really interesting is that very often it seems that, at least for once, a lot of the systems are working together. The library system, the workforce system, the junior college system, and the adult education systems. I think part of that is people are realizing the extent of the need. Part of it is also that there's enough funding available now that the people aren't fighting for turfs quite so much as might be the case otherwise. So I think we have collectively a wonderful opportunity in many states to really expand digital literacy education and support and navigation. And the models are out there. There's been a lot of work done in the last couple of years on different models of teaching and the digital navigation and so on. So we have the tools we need. And I think it's a matter of just using those. And then finally, I just want to mention, I did allude to this earlier, but thinking about what's culturally relevant outreach training and support. How do students identify their needs and how can we meet those in an accessible manner? And I think one example of that we've all seen is in throughout COVID-19, many things have become clear, but it's how people in a given cultural context communicate their needs and what are trusted sources of information and what are the digital literacy skills and capacities are all just really important factors that need to be taken into account. So even though we have models of doing certain things, I think we need to be really aware of how those models are implemented and how do we communicate back and forth with the people that are the end users, so we make sure that their needs are met in a way that is not only effective, but is comfortable and accessible for them on a personal level.
Thank you so much, Tom. Really important insight there. And thank you, Judy, for joining us. I know you need to leave a little bit early. Well, Sean, let's not leave out one of the most important new programs for those of us who support digital inclusion and are advocates for digital equity, the Emergency Broadband Benefit. What is it? What should we expect from it? And what will the impact be on digital skilling, especially as local stakeholders organize local capacity to respond?
Well, first, let me say thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to present on this very interesting and very white hot and popular program. Everywhere you go, everywhere I look, I see the words EBB or the letters EBB. I see it in my sleep. I see it in my dreams. It is everywhere. No, so the Emergency Broadband Benefit, as the slide states, is a emergency federal program that has been the first of many to come to aid folks to secure internet service devices due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Krista, if you wouldn't mind hitting the next slide for me. So what's the benefit? As the slide states, it's a quick $10 to $50 a month discount for broadband services, up to $75 a month for for households on tribal lands, and also including a one-time discount of $100 for a laptop, desktop computer, or a tablet, no mobile phones. It's important to state that the internet service provider participation in this program is 100% voluntary. They do not, I repeat, they do not have to participate in this. This is something that you might say they're doing out of the kindness of their heart. That's important because essentially you will find what we're finding and what many households and community-based orgs will find is that some deals are better than others. Some providers offer devices, some don't. Some programs cost more than others. This is not a one-stop shop blanket program. And with that being said, it's important that folks who are doing the work and doing the advocacy are doing their due diligence as best they can to present and give households the right information, accurate information, and to also equip households with the information that will allow them to make the best decision for themselves and their families. If you get the next slide for me, Kristen. So what do households get? Well, the internet service, again, covers everything above dial-up. So that includes fixed, that includes wireless, that includes hotspots, that includes pretty much any form of internet service except dial-up. Now, if any of the folks in the call come across someone who wants dial-up internet, I think you might need to have a different conversation with them. However, everything is covered above dial-up. So the gigabyte data plans, however, are excluded. The eligible devices, and this is also important because we're finding that a lot of the service providers are not offering devices, which is a challenge. However, um, the devices that are offered, they have to be Wi-Fi enabled and they have to support video conferencing. Again, this is in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Most of us are working from the comfort of our home. Most of most of our children or our siblings or family are going to school from the comfort of their home. And so how can you do that without video conferencing, without a device that is Wi-Fi enabled? The other piece that's important to mention is that the programs or the programs that or the offers, discount offers that the providers uh, are that have listed, they have to have been given back since December 1st, 2020. And the reason for that is because we don't want ISPs essentially using this as a opportunity to get more money. And so it kind of keeps those providers at a uh, fixed offer that they were already providing. This is really a means to incentivize the providers to continue to keep their low cost discount offers at that same price, at that same speed. However, it's important to mention that they can improve upon those. And so a provider can say, well, we're going to offer faster service for the same price. Or they can say, we're offering the same service for a lower price. Essentially, they can make it better. They just can't make it any worse. Next slide, please. Who is eligible? Now, this is the million-dollar question. Everyone wants to know who can sign up, how can you sign up? First, for starters, if you qualify for Lifeline, you're in. This is not, I believe we're all adults on the call. I like to make references. This is kind of one of those early adult clubs in which pretty much there aren't a lot of restrictions on getting into this club. Who's eligible? Folks who have received a federal Pell Grant, folks who their income is at or below 135% of the federal poverty guidelines. However, you can also be eligible for this program if you've experienced a substantial loss of income since February 29th, 2020. Now, you would have to go to the getemergencybroadband.org to determine exactly what that substantial loss of income. But essentially, for folks who have lost their job or had to maybe lost their job and or received a significant decrease in pay due to COVID-19 are eligible. The other very, very important piece to mention is that, excuse me, folks are also eligible if they meet the criteria for one of the participating ISP's low income program. And so let's take me for example. I might qualify for this is completely fictitious, but I might qualify for the Digital Equitable Service Company. I might qualify for their COVID-19 program. I might not qualify for any other program that is offered from any other provider. But if I qualify for that one, then I'm eligible for EBB. Now, and that's essentially each provider may have their own separate criteria that they had enlisted before EBB, and so this is just keeping true to what that to what those providers were doing. Next slide, please, Krista. How do households apply? Now, this is a very, very not sure what the right word is, but this is a very challenging question, and I have a not so clean cut answer because essentially, there are three ways, yes, to apply: through the National Verifier, through a participating ISP website, or through the mail. However, if you have no internet whatsoever, have no device whatsoever, no internet, the only way to apply is through the mail. So if you're applying through the mail, then you also have to provide documentation that proves you are eligible. However, if you do not have internet and you do not have a computer, 9.9 times out of 10, you do not have a printer to make a copy of eligible documentation that shows that you qualify for a federal subsidy program. It just, I am, however, because I do not get paid to rant and rave about FCC programs or federal programs, I will simply say that there's some easier ways to apply than others. Obviously, if you apply through the National Verifier, you have a host of options that you can see and look at. And if you're already on Lifeline, then your application process would be much smoother. And as a matter of fact, there is no need to provide eligible, or there is no need to show documentation proving your eligibility because you're already on Lifeline, so your information is in the database. When applying through the ISP, it's important to mention that households do have to provide identifiable information: name, mailing address, phone number, date of birth. And this is also true if you do not want to provide your social security number. Now, you can, but for folks who are weary of doing so, then you can simply offer your driver's license number, your tax identification number, or your tribal household number. Next slide, please, Kristen. When does this begin? Well, T-minus since yesterday. So we're already experiencing and seeing some challenges. There's a high demand, which quite frankly is a good thing because we want folks to use this. We want to show need because this is an emergency temporary program. It is not something that will be here forever, and we're not sure that it'll even be here through the end of the year. And so in order to push Congress, in order to push state and local governments that there needs to be a permanent broadband benefit, we have to show need. This is one of the first times that we've ever seen a federal program offer this much money simply focused on broadband adoption. And that's great. That's amazing. However, it's temporary. And because it's temporary, some folks might say, what's the point of signing up? I'm just going to get this and then I have to get off of it in 2, 3, maybe 4 months at best. Well, there are also devices offered. And so if a family doesn't have a device, granted, yes, you might not be able to maintain your internet service, but that discount of up to $100 that gets you a device, you can take that device to your public libraries, you can take that device to a school or any place that has open free Wi-Fi. And so we want to make sure that folks are taking advantage of this. And so please encourage households, your constituents, anyone, your grandmom, your dog, everyone to sign up as early as possible to maximize this benefit. It's also important for me to mention that USAC will maintain a monthly tracker to report the remaining funds, and that it is mandatory for ISPs to notify households the last month that they'll be able to obtain the free to get the free service. And once that free service is up and that last month is up, they have to get an affirmative opt-in from households stating that they want to participate and they want to continue, even if it means that they have to pay. That being said, the households would then be susceptible to the ISP's terms and conditions, any type of late fees, anything like that. That's when that ticker starts. Throughout the duration of the program, they are not susceptible, even if you owe an ISP money because of a late fee or just the fact that you didn't pay a bill. Anything like that is null and void up until the end of the program. Next slide, please. Last but not least, please go to getemergencybroadband.org for more details, for more questions than I might have to answer all of these. You can also call the Emergency Broadband Support Center. There is the number for all folks who can't see it. If anyone is on a phone call, I don't know if WebEx allows folks to chime in from a phone, but if they can, the number is 833-511-0311. Or you can also email them at ebbhelp@usac.org. I've called them multiple times to get answers to questions myself. As much as I might seem like a guru, I am not. I am calling them consistently because there's a lot happening with this program. So we want to make sure that folks get as much as they can, and we provide you all with the right information. Next slide, and I think that might be all. Yes.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you so much, Sean. You may have to continue to assume guru status though, because we have quite a few questions in the chat related to the EBB program. Have about 10 minutes left and can get through as many of these questions as we can. We're also listing the contact information for each of our panelists today. If you'd like to contact them offline after the program is over, they all graciously agreed to take your additional questions. So if I might go back to you, Sean, is a best practice to, if you're a frontline service provider and you're working with families that you think may qualify, is the best practice to encourage them to go ahead and fill out the application for EBB
Yeah,
enrollment?
I would say that, well, one, it's important to, if you can, to assist. Now, the household, the person that is eligible, they do have to be the one that signs, that they understand what they're signing up for, and that they are agreeing to it. So you can't necessarily do it for them, but you can certainly do it with them. And so I think that for folks who are on the front lines, taking a look at the application, kind of anticipating needs and questions, the link that I just put in the chat, the Get Emergent, the NDI's EBB webpage is filled with resources and videos that have all of this information. And I will continue to put links in the chat that indicate some other questions that folks have.
Thank you. And among those support providers in the community, are you seeing public libraries really take an active role to support enrollment for EBB?
Well, that is a great question. So what I can say is that unfortunately, there is no money for schools, libraries, anchor institutions, community broadband orgs to participate in this. However, when one door closes, another opens, and so the Emergency Connectivity Fund, has a total of $7.171 billion specifically for schools and libraries to continue this work. And so this is a separate pool of money from the emergency broadband benefit that allows for folks to utilize these services. Also, my colleague Paulo Balboa just sent me a very, very useful link for libraries to take a look at from. So please take, if you get a chance, take a look at that for more assistance. Yes.
Thank you. And just building on that, we'll include these links that Sean has put in the chat, the recording and the PowerPoint in our follow-up message to all attendees. Well, maybe one more question about EBB, and then we'll see if there were other questions about the other topics of the program today. Finding out if a participating ISP is offering the device benefit. Is all that information available from the
If you, the link, the participating broadband providers, it literally shows you state by state who is participating, and it shows you if they're offering devices. And you can also, if you go to any Comcast, T-Mobile, Verizon, or Cox and type their name plus emergency broadband benefit, you'll be taken to a page where you'll see whether or not what they're offering. Again, unfortunately, a lot of folks are not offering devices. What we're hearing is that companies are experiencing a shortage just because manufacturers are not open to full capacity due to COVID. And so the number of available devices is not as high as it once was, or even as it should be. but here we are. There are folks that are offering devices. It's just not as many.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Lots of questions about EBV. But I don't want to overlook any final comments that Tom and Michelle may have had about all of today's topics. Why don't we try for the classic NDIA lightning round and do about a 30 seconds each of final comments as we await any last questions from the audience. Tom, if you'd like to start. Go ahead and unmute, please.
And Krista, this is Tiffany. While Tom is unmuting, just I guess some really preliminary questions I caught in the chat before folks wrap up was around defining NRS, which I think Tom mentioned, and the Digital Navigator program. I don't know if you want to take that one.
Tom, why don't you define NRS again, and I'll speak to the Digital Navigator program briefly.
Oh, the definition of NRS, you said, is the National Reporting System, and that's the federal system which all adult education programs are accountable to for reporting their outcomes each year, the things that Judy was talking about. It's not a system that many of us have any great affection for, I guess I can safely say. But it's a very rigid, very specific way of using various testing to show how people have progressed in terms of their English abilities and math abilities, or whatever that is being assessed and measured.
Thank you. And very briefly, LISC's Digital Navigator program at both our rural community-based organizations and in urban markets at financial opportunity centers has been focused on supporting folks with device access, home internet access in the case of the rural program, and skilling to use both. We have a lot of information on our website that goes into detail about how our program is designed. But Tom, I might throw it back to you for any further thoughts about how to start a Digital Navigator program in your community or coordinate local resources to provide folks with the same types of services that this Digital Navigator model is attempting to support.
I guess the two things that come to my mind is first to realize that there are really good Digital Navigator models that have already been developed. World Ed, NDIA, Literacy Minnesota, probably others. Those are the two that I'm most familiar with. So you don't have to start from scratch and define what a Digital Navigator is or what skills they need or what they need to do. So that would be one thing. And then number two, just reiterating that move quickly. I would try to identify the key decision makers, whether you're working at the local level or the state level. Who are the key decision makers? Try to establish relationships with them as quickly as possible, and understand that they're generally well-intentioned. They've been handed a lot of responsibility and a lot of money that they need to disperse fairly quickly. So my experience has been that they react pretty well to well-thought-out plans of how they can meet their goals in terms of getting people connected and trained and so on.
Thank you. Michelle, final thoughts?
I would just add, particularly in terms of accessing EBB, for FOCs or other partners who are providing integrated services, to think about the financial coaching component of this and how this impacts households' monthly budgets, but then also planning for the longer term, given that we know as of now EBB is temporary, and what happens after EBB runs out, and making sure that families have a plan for how they're going to continue to be able to afford or transition to a lower cost internet service.
Thank you. Key insight. And Sean, any last words?
I would just say to, and I'm sure we'll have the links and everything sent in, but I would just say to take advantage of looking at those resources. Please call the hotline, the Emergency Broadband Support Center, even if it's just for where do I find this, where do I find that, because we want to use this program as menial as it might seem in some cases. It shows need, and there's a much larger play with advocating for a permanent broadband benefit, that the more we use this, the more we can show that cause and that need. And so please, if there are any questions or comments or anything, please feel free to reach out to me.
Excellent. Thank you for underscoring that. This is our moment, those of us who are hopeful to advance digital equity, upskilling for a thriving 21st century workforce. I want to thank the panel so very much. Enjoyed your presentations. Thank you to our audience. The recording, presentation, and links will be made available to you after. And take care, everybody. Be well.
Thank you.